June 7th, 1944, 5:30 in the morning. The air was cold, and a thick mist covered the fields of Normandy. Everything seemed quiet, almost peaceful, but anyone who knew war could feel the tension hanging in the air. Soldiers moved quietly into their positions, boots crunching over the frost-covered ground. Tanks rumbled softly in the distance, their engines sounding like growling beasts. Far above, planes droned as they flew over the battlefield. It was a calm that made every soldier's nerves tense because everyone knew that soon, all hell would break loose. In the middle of all this was one man, a commander whose reputation had already spread across the Allied and enemy lines. They called him Unkillable, a man who seemed to survive when others fell, whose courage and skill made him almost impossible to defeat, and whose decisions would soon turn him into a legend. The Germans were advancing, confident in their tanks and experience. 18 German tanks were moving in formation, their tracks tearing through the frost, their big barrels glinting in the weak morning sunlight. Most commanders facing such firepower would have panicked, shouted orders in confusion, or even considered retreat. But not him. He stayed calm, surveying the battlefield with sharp, careful eyes. Every ridge, every hedgerow, every broken fence or building was being noted. These weren't just obstacles, they were opportunities. Every piece of terrain could help him survive and strike back. The soldiers around him felt a mixture of fear and awe. They had trained for months, even years, but nothing truly prepares you for real battle. Yet seeing their commander standing calmly, giving orders, they felt a strange sense of confidence. They knew he had survived situations that would have killed ordinary men. They knew his reputation wasn't just stories, it was real. His presence gave them courage. Even in the cold, misty morning, they felt ready because he had taught them, without words, that fear could be controlled, that panic could be overcome, and that victory was possible if you stayed smart and focused. The German tanks were getting closer. Their engines roared louder, and the sound of metal on frozen ground was frightening. Each tank was a threat. Each one could crush anything in its path. And yet, the commander didn't rush. He was moving slowly, deliberately, making sure every action was precise. He wasn't reckless, and he wasn't frozen with fear. He was ready. He had an ability to read the battlefield, to understand what might happen before it actually did. His men didn't need to guess what to do. They followed his lead because he had earned their trust. The misty battlefield made it hard to see, and the Germans assumed that their numbers and firepower would give them the advantage. But they underestimated him. They didn't know that this one man, with careful observation and planning, could turn the battlefield into a trap for them. Each tank that moved closer was unaware of the dangers waiting. They didn't know that terrain, speed, and smart positioning could make a single commander more powerful than their entire formation. As dawn broke a little more, the tension grew. The commander moved among his men, checking their positions, giving small signals, nods, or hand gestures. Each movement was deliberate. He had faced ambushes, artillery fire, and attacks before, and he survived. He knew how to keep his men focused, how to keep fear from taking over, and how to make sure everyone was ready for the fight ahead. His calmness was contagious. Soldiers who were tense and nervous started to feel steady because of his presence. For a little support and encouragement, make sure to like this video and follow the channel. Your appreciation helps this community grow. Around him, the men quietly whispered about his reputation. They had seen him survive battles that should have been impossible. They had watched him make decisions that saved lives and defeated the enemy. Now, facing 18 German tanks, they couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and fear. They knew that what happened next would not just test their skill, but also prove why he was called Unkillable. The Germans, confident in their tanks and their crews, were advancing without fear. They thought this would be an easy victory, but the commander had other plans. He understood that a battlefield is more than just numbers or weapons. It is about timing, positioning, courage, and quick thinking. He could predict the enemy's moves, use the terrain to his advantage, and make decisions faster than they could react. His calmness in the face of danger gave his men courage, and his skill would soon surprise the enemy. Even the small details mattered to him. He noticed shadows in the mist, shapes moving in the distance, the slight sounds of engines, and the way the ground felt under the tracks of approaching tanks. All of these little details helped him plan the first move, the first strike. He knew that one mistake could be deadly, but he also knew that hesitation would be even worse. So he stayed focused, thinking one step ahead, imagining how each tank would move, how his own troops could respond, and how the battlefield could shift in his favor. The men around him watched and listened, ready to follow his every command. They trusted him because they had seen him survive when survival seemed impossible. They trusted him because he had made careful, smart choices under fire before. And now, in the early morning light of Normandy, as 18 German tanks came closer, the soldiers waited, tense but steady, ready to act under the guidance of their unkillable commander. It was more than just courage, it was leadership. The commander understood that fear spreads quickly, but so does confidence. His calmness gave his men a sense of control. It gave them the strength to face overwhelming odds and to fight as one unit. Even as the tanks rumbled closer, even as the sound of metal scraping against frozen ground grew louder, his presence reminded them that survival and victory were possible. The battlefield was ready for the fight. Mist swirled around broken fences and hedgerows. The ground was frozen and treacherous. Tanks, soldiers, and artillery lined up for battle. And in the center of it all, the commander stood, calm, observing, thinking, preparing. He wasn't just waiting. He was already planning, already calculating, already ready to turn the enemy's confidence into fear. The Germans had no idea what was coming. They only saw one commander, a small force in comparison to their 18 tanks. They thought he could be stopped, that their firepower would be enough to crush him and his men. But they didn't know about his skill, his instincts, and the experience that had earned him the nickname Unkillable. They didn't know that the man in front of them could use every advantage, every piece of terrain, every calculated move to survive, and turn the battle in his favor. The soldiers around him felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. Fear because of the tanks, because of the unknown, because of what might happen if even one mistake was made. Excitement because they trusted their commander and knew that if anyone could survive and win against overwhelming odds, it was him. They had seen him do it before, and now they were about to witness it again. And so, the battlefield waited with bated breath. Mist clung to the ground, engines growled in the distance, soldiers gripped their weapons, and the unkillable commander surveyed the field. He knew what had to be done. He had survived impossible situations before. He had led men who trusted him completely. And now, as 18 German tanks came closer, he prepared to show everyone why he was called Unkillable, why his men followed him without hesitation, and why this morning in Normandy would become a story that people would tell for generations. The first German tank appeared over the distant ridge, and the battlefield suddenly seemed alive with motion. Its engine growled like a predator, and the crew inside was confident, thinking their numbers and firepower would easily crush any opposition. But the commander remained calm, scanning the horizon, his mind already calculating the angles, the distances, the timing. He didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He had trained his eyes to notice every detail, the way the sun reflected off the tank's armor, the shadows it cast on the frosty ground, even the sound of its tracks against the earth. All of this gave him information, small pieces that, when combined, allowed him to predict what the enemy would do next. He raised his hand, signaling to his men. The soldiers and tank crews, who had trained under him, moved with confidence, responding to his subtle gestures, as if they were part of a single organism. The first shot was fired from his position, a precise strike aimed at the German tank's weakest point. The shell hit perfectly. The tank shook violently, smoke and flames erupting from the hatch and barrel. Metal crumpled, and the explosion sent a plume of debris into the air. The soldiers around him stared in awe, and even the Germans were shocked. They hadn't expected resistance like this, let alone a commander standing calmly while their tank went up in flames. One tank down, 17 more to go. Each approaching tank carried men trained for battle, but now hesitation began to creep in. The commander didn't waste a moment. He adjusted his position slightly, using a small ridge to shield his tank from view while allowing him to aim carefully at the next target. His crew followed his instructions perfectly, loading shells, adjusting the aim, and firing with the rhythm that had been drilled into them. What made this moment remarkable wasn't just that he could destroy tanks, but the way he did it, combining timing, observation, and strategy with absolute calm. The Germans pressed forward, not realizing they were walking into a carefully calculated defense. The commander knew how they moved, how they would react to explosions, how their crews would panic under sudden losses. With each destroyed tank, their confidence began to weaken. They had faced armored units before, but never like this. They hadn't faced a commander who seemed to anticipate their every move, who used terrain and timing to turn their own strength against them. Around him, his soldiers felt the energy of the moment. Fear was still there. It always is in battle, but it was tempered by trust. They trusted their commander, and that trust gave them courage they didn't know they had. Every shot fired, every tank destroyed, was a lesson in what leadership could do under pressure. They saw him calculating, predicting, and moving with a precision that made them believe in him completely. The battlefield, chaotic and dangerous, suddenly seemed ordered, controlled, because of his presence and decisions. The second German tank rolled forward. He didn't panic. He watched, waited, and then struck at the perfect moment. Another explosion, another plume of smoke, and the German crew inside scrambled in confusion. The commander's actions were methodical, almost like a chess game. Each tank represented a move, and he was always thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. He understood not just his own weapons, but the psychology of the enemy. He knew fear spreads quickly, and he used that knowledge to his advantage. The third tank approached, and the commander shifted slightly to gain a better angle. He used a combination of natural cover and debris from the battlefield, making it harder for the enemy to aim accurately. He didn't just attack. He positioned, planned, and adjusted constantly. His crew followed his commands with precision, trusting his instincts even when the danger was obvious. It was this combination of skill, leadership, and calm that made him so effective, that made him seem untouchable to the enemy. By the 4th and 5th tanks, the Germans were starting to feel the pressure. Their confidence wavered. Crews shouted orders inside the tanks, trying to coordinate, but the commander's actions disrupted their rhythm. Every destroyed tank was a psychological blow, and he knew it. He used each victory not just to reduce enemy numbers, but to unsettle them, to make them doubt, to make them hesitate. In battle, hesitation can be deadly, and he was counting on it. The battlefield was alive with smoke, debris, and the sounds of explosions. His men were focused, moving efficiently, loading, aiming, and firing. They trusted their commander's judgment completely because they had seen him survive impossible situations before. Each destroyed tank added to their belief that victory was possible, even against overwhelming odds. They felt a sense of pride, not just in their weapons, but in the man leading them. The 6th and 7th tanks came into view. He had already studied the terrain, noting the positions of ridges, ditches, and hedgerows. Each movement of the tanks was predicted, each route considered, each weak point calculated. He gave simple, clear commands, and his crew executed them flawlessly. Each shell fired hit exactly where it needed to, and each explosion sent a shockwave across the battlefield. The Germans were confused, frustrated, and fearful. They didn't understand how a single commander could control the battlefield so completely. By the 8th tank, the enemy's advance was faltering. They had expected an easy push, but instead they faced a commander who seemed to anticipate every action. He had turned their numbers against them, their strength into a weakness. His combination of calm, observation, and timing had created chaos in their ranks. Fear was spreading, and hesitation was replacing confidence. They had underestimated him, and now they were paying the price. The 9th and 10th tanks were approaching, and the commander remained focused. He adjusted positions, shifted angles, and used terrain cleverly to maximize cover while maintaining an advantage. His crew followed his every instruction, firing shells with precision and efficiency. Each destroyed tank brought more chaos to the enemy's formation and more confidence to his own men. The contrast was striking. One man and his crew versus an armored formation, yet the advantage clearly lay with him. The 11th tank approached, and he used a small ridge to his advantage. From this hidden position, he was able to strike, without being seen first. The shell hit perfectly, and the tank was destroyed. By now, the Germans were starting to panic. Crews inside the tanks shouted in confusion, trying to figure out what was happening. They hadn't faced anything like this before. They hadn't faced a commander who combined calm, observation, and tactical brilliance to such effect. The 12th and 13th tanks were next. The commander didn't hesitate. He moved slightly to gain a better angle, signaling his crew silently, almost like a conductor leading an orchestra. Each shot was deliberate, each movement planned, and each tank fell to his precision. His men were inspired. They felt like they were part of something bigger, something extraordinary. They were seeing a man turn the impossible into reality. The 14th tank approached, and the commander used every trick he knew. Terrain, timing, surprise, all were part of his strategy. The shell hit, the tank erupted in flames, and the battlefield seemed to shake with the impact. The Germans were now confused, fearful, and frustrated. They had faced strong armies before, but never someone who seemed untouchable, who used every advantage the battlefield offered, and who made destruction look almost easy. The 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th tanks followed. Each one met the same fate. Each one added to the commander's legend. His crew moved like a single unit, every man knowing exactly what to do because they trusted him completely. Each destroyed tank sent shockwaves through the enemy ranks. They didn't just lose equipment, they lost confidence, coordination, and morale. The commander had turned fear into a weapon, using it against the enemy while keeping his own men focused and inspired. By the end of the engagement, 18 German tanks had been destroyed. The battlefield was chaotic, filled with smoke and debris, but the commander and his men stood unscathed. He had not only survived an overwhelming attack, but had turned it into a stunning victory. His skill, timing, and calm under pressure had made him seem untouchable, a living legend in the eyes of his soldiers and a nightmare to the enemy. His ability to combine observation, tactical skill, and leadership had created a battlefield performance that would be remembered for generations. As the smoke from the destroyed tanks began to clear, the battlefield was no longer just a place of fire and destruction. It had become a stage for the commander's skill and leadership. The Germans had expected a straightforward advance, confident in the power of their 18 tanks. But what they faced was something entirely different. Each tank they had lost had not only reduced their numbers, but had also shaken their confidence. Fear started to creep into their ranks, and hesitation replaced their previous confidence. They had underestimated the commander, and now they were beginning to realize that they were facing someone far more dangerous than they had imagined. The commander stood in the midst of this chaos, calm and focused. He wasn't just thinking about destroying tanks. He was thinking about the battlefield as a whole. Every move he made was calculated, every command carefully considered. He understood the psychology of both his men and his enemy. His soldiers were watching him closely, learning from his calmness and precision. They saw someone who didn't panic, who didn't rush, who didn't make mistakes under pressure. That confidence rubbed off on them, giving them courage they didn't know they had. They started to act faster, think clearer, and fight harder because they trusted their commander completely. The Germans, on the other hand, were beginning to panic. They had trained for battles, faced tough enemies before, and believed their experience and tanks would give them the advantage. But this commander had shown them that skill, courage, and clever use of terrain could turn the tide even against overwhelming odds. Every destroyed tank became a lesson for the enemy, a signal that they could not predict his moves, could not outsmart him, and could not break his focus. The fear was spreading quickly through their ranks, slowing their advance, making them second-guess their decisions, and forcing them to act more cautiously. The commander's tactics were not just about attacking. They were about control. He controlled where the battle would happen, how it would unfold, and what the enemy could or could not do. He used the terrain brilliantly. Hidden ridges, hedgerows, broken roads, and small ditches were all part of his strategy. The enemy could see them, but they couldn't predict how he would use them. He moved with precision, making it seem effortless, and each action he took amplified the confusion and fear among the German crews. His leadership turned the battlefield into a place where his men felt confident and the enemy felt uncertain. Around him, his soldiers were inspired. They had faced fear before, but nothing like this. They were seeing someone survive and fight under impossible conditions. Someone who seemed untouchable. It gave them a new kind of courage. They followed his commands quickly, moved strategically, and coordinated their attacks better than they ever had before. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to achieve something extraordinary, led by a commander who had redefined what was possible on the battlefield. As the enemy hesitated, the commander seized every opportunity. He didn't just wait for mistakes, he forced them. Each movement he made, each adjustment of his tank's position, each command to his crew was designed to exploit even the smallest weakness in the German formation. They tried to regroup, tried to push forward, but every step they took was anticipated. The commander seemed to be always one step ahead, predicting where they would go, how they would react, and what they would do next. His ability to think several moves ahead was what made him so dangerous and so respected by those who watched him in action. The psychological impact of his actions was profound. The German crews, trained and experienced, were now unsure of themselves. They had lost tanks, seen their formation disrupted, and felt the presence of someone who seemed untouchable. Fear had replaced confidence, and hesitation had replaced boldness. Meanwhile, the commander's men were gaining strength and courage. They had seen their leader survive and succeed against overwhelming odds, and it made them believe that they could do the same. Confidence, like fear, spreads quickly on a battlefield, and in this case, it flowed from the commander to his men with every move he made. He didn't just inspire his soldiers through words, he inspired them through action. Every calculated move, every precise shot, every clever use of terrain was a lesson. They watched, learned, and followed his example. They saw what leadership under pressure looked like. They saw how to stay calm when everything around them was chaotic. They learned that fear could be controlled, that mistakes could be minimized, and that the impossible could be achieved with focus and courage. By the end of this engagement, they weren't just a unit. They were a team operating with the confidence and skill of a unit that had learned from the best. The Germans, meanwhile, were struggling. Each destroyed tank made them doubt their previous plans. They had expected an easy advance, but now they were dealing with a commander who seemed to anticipate every action. They tried to adjust, tried to find a weak point, but their hesitation allowed the commander to control the battlefield even more. He was not just reacting to their moves. He was shaping them, turning their strengths into weaknesses, and creating opportunities where none seemed to exist. His actions were methodical and precise, yet they appeared almost effortless. Even small mistakes by the enemy were quickly exploited. A tank moving too close to another became an easy target. A German crew hesitating to fire gave him time to reposition and strike from an unexpected angle. The commander used every small detail to his advantage. His awareness of the battlefield, his ability to predict enemy behavior, and his skill in using every resource available made him almost untouchable. To the German soldiers, he must have seemed like a ghost, always in the right place, always ready, and always deadly. The battle continued, and the commander's influence grew with every move. His men were no longer just following orders. They were thinking like him, moving with confidence, and acting decisively. They were inspired by his skill and courage, and it gave them strength to face danger head-on. The battlefield, once filled with fear and chaos, now had a sense of order. The commander's calmness and leadership became the anchor that allowed his men to fight effectively and fearlessly. The enemy, on the other hand, was in disarray. Their confidence, shattered by the loss of tanks and their inability to predict the commander's moves, they struggled to maintain coordination. They shouted orders, tried to regroup, but each action seemed anticipated and countered. Fear had taken hold, and it was spreading from crew to crew. The commander's psychological advantage was now as powerful as his tactical skill. He had turned not just the battlefield, but the minds of his enemy, into a place of uncertainty and doubt. By this point, the commander had proven that leadership is more than just giving orders. It is about inspiring others through action, controlling the battlefield not just physically but mentally, and staying calm under extreme pressure. His skill and courage created a ripple effect. His men became more confident, his enemy became more fearful, and the battle itself unfolded in the way he intended. He had not only survived against overwhelming odds, but he had also shaped the fight, turning a dangerous situation into an opportunity for victory. Even as the battle raged on, one thing was clear. This commander was extraordinary. His ability to combine tactical skill, psychological insight, and leadership under pressure made him a figure that both his soldiers admired and his enemies feared. The psychological impact of his actions would be remembered long after the smoke cleared. His men had seen what true leadership looked like, and the Germans had learned that underestimating someone like him could be disastrous. With every destroyed tank, every calculated move, and every inspiring action, the commander's legend grew. He was more than just a soldier or a leader. He was a symbol of courage, skill, and determination. The battlefield became a stage where his ability shone brightest, and both his men and his enemies could not ignore the impact he had on the fight. His combination of calm, observation, and leadership had turned fear into a weapon against the enemy and confidence into a strength for his own men, proving that the mind is as powerful a tool in battle as any weapon. As the battle unfolded, it became clear that the commander was achieving something extraordinary. He had already destroyed a significant number of enemy tanks, and the battlefield now bent to his will. Each movement was precise, each decision deliberate, and each action designed to maximize his advantage. His men were operating with confidence, inspired by his calm and decisive leadership. They followed his every command without hesitation, trusting his instincts and experience even in the most dangerous moments. They were no longer just a unit, they were a team, moving as one organism, acting with the skill and precision of a force that had learned from the best. The enemy, meanwhile, was struggling to regroup. Their confidence had been shattered, and hesitation replaced their once bold advance. They tried to coordinate, tried to push forward, but the commander had already anticipated their moves. He used every weakness, every small mistake, and every moment of confusion to his advantage. His ability to read the battlefield and the enemy's intentions made him almost untouchable. To the German crews, he must have seemed like a force of nature, striking when and where they least expected, and surviving against odds that should have been impossible. By midday, the scale of his achievement became undeniable. 18 German tanks had been destroyed, and each destruction carried a psychological impact far greater than the loss of machinery. Fear had spread through the enemy ranks, and the soldiers were now unsure of what to do. They had faced experienced commanders before, but none who combined calm, skill, and timing in the way he did. His mastery of the battlefield was not just in his ability to fire and maneuver, but in how he controlled the minds and movements of the enemy. He made them hesitate, second-guess, and falter, while his own men grew stronger, more confident, and more coordinated. The battlefield was chaotic, filled with smoke, fire, and the sound of explosions. Yet the commander remained the center of focus. He didn't just react to events, he shaped them. Every decision, from where to position his tank to when to fire, was calculated to create maximum effect. His approach was not based on brute force alone. It was based on understanding, observation, and anticipation. He knew that the enemy's greatest weakness was often their overconfidence, and he exploited it ruthlessly. Each destroyed tank reinforced his reputation and spread doubt through the German ranks. His men watched him with admiration and awe. They had seen soldiers fall, battles lost, and chaos around them, but here was someone who could remain calm and effective under extreme pressure. His actions inspired them to be better, to act faster, to trust their instincts and training, and to believe that victory was possible even in the most dangerous circumstances. They weren't just following orders. They were learning from a master. Every move he made taught them something about leadership, courage, and tactical thinking. The Germans tried to adjust. They attempted to change their formation, to flank, to concentrate firepower on his position. But the commander was always ready. He anticipated their adjustments, repositioned his tank, and continued to strike with deadly accuracy. His awareness of the battlefield was unmatched. He used terrain, cover, and timing to his advantage. Hills, hedgerows, and broken roads became tools in his hands, amplifying the impact of every decision. He didn't just survive. He dominated the battlefield in a way that few could comprehend. Other Allied units began to take notice. They saw what was happening in Normandy and realized that this commander was achieving something unique. His tactics, his use of terrain, his timing, and his leadership were being observed and recorded by others. He was setting a new standard for armored warfare, showing that skill, strategy, and courage could overcome experience and numbers. Even those not directly under his command began to adapt some of his methods, learning from the example he set in real time on the battlefield. The psychological impact on both sides continued to grow. His men were energized, confident, and focused. They had seen firsthand how decisive leadership and tactical awareness could turn a battle that seemed impossible into a stunning victory. They understood that fear could be controlled, and that hesitation was far more dangerous than any weapon. The Germans, by contrast, were demoralized. Their confidence was shaken, their movement slowed, and their ability to coordinate had been severely disrupted. One commander had turned the tide simply through skill, observation, and courage. The commander's rise to fame was not just about destroying tanks. It was about how he did it. He had taken a unit with limited experience and led them to achieve what most thought impossible. His combination of leadership, tactical brilliance, and calm under pressure was creating results that no one could ignore. His name would spread among Allied troops, whispered in admiration, and among enemy soldiers, whispered in fear. He had become a symbol of what one skilled and determined individual could accomplish even against overwhelming odds. Throughout the day, he continued to maneuver, attack, and inspire. He was not reckless. Every action was calculated. He understood the limits of his tank, the abilities of his crew, and the weaknesses of the enemy. By balancing risk and opportunity, he maintained the initiative throughout the battle. His decisions were guided not just by what was happening in the moment, but by anticipating what would happen next. That foresight allowed him to strike effectively while avoiding unnecessary danger. The destruction of 18 tanks was remarkable, but it was also a lesson in leadership and strategy. The commander had demonstrated that preparation, observation, timing, and courage could overcome numbers and experience. He had shown that a unit, no matter how inexperienced, could achieve extraordinary results when led by someone who understood both the battlefield and human nature. His ability to combine these elements made him a top Western Allied tank ace, and a legend in the eyes of his men and the enemy. By the end of the day, the battlefield bore the marks of his skill. Burned-out tanks, scattered debris, and the chaos of a frustrated enemy told the story of one commander's determination and expertise. His men had survived, inspired by his example, and the Germans had learned the hard way that underestimating him would be their downfall. The techniques he used, the decisions he made, and the calm leadership he displayed were studied by other units, adopted by those who recognized their value, and remembered as an example of what armored warfare could be when executed with precision and courage. The commander had not only achieved a stunning tactical victory, he had also created a lasting legacy. He had shown that skill and leadership could overcome fear, that courage could inspire others, and that one individual's actions could shape the outcome of a battle. His ability to destroy 18 tanks and remain unscathed became more than just a feat of combat. It became a story of strategy, leadership, and the power of calm under pressure. Soldiers on both sides would remember this day, and his influence would be felt long after the battle was over. The rise to top ace status was inevitable. His skill with the German tank, his understanding of armored warfare, and his ability to lead men under extreme pressure had set him apart. Others began to study his methods, to emulate his tactics, and to recognize that what he had accomplished was not luck. It was the result of intelligence, preparation, and fearless leadership. By mastering these elements, he had turned a chaotic battlefield into a controlled, decisive victory, and in doing so, became a figure that would be remembered as one of the finest tank commanders of the Western Allies. He had achieved the impossible not just by destroying tanks, but by controlling the battlefield, inspiring his men, and instilling fear in his enemy. The destruction of 18 German tanks was a dramatic proof of his skill, but the real story was how he had done it, with calm, foresight, leadership, and courage. He had shown that one determined and intelligent commander could change the course of a battle, influence the actions of others, and rise to a level of legendary status that few could reach. His methods and tactics would continue to influence armored units throughout the campaign, proving that innovation and courage could outperform experience and numbers. After the battle, the commander's achievements became the talk of both his unit and the larger Allied forces. Destroying 18 German tanks was an incredible feat, but what made it truly remarkable was not just the number of tanks destroyed. It was how he did it, how he led his men, and how he turned fear and chaos into confidence and control. Soldiers who had witnessed the events described it with awe. They had seen a man face overwhelming odds, stay calm under intense pressure, and lead them to success when the outcome could have been disaster. His actions inspired not only those who fought alongside him, but also other units who would hear about his tactics and bravery. The lessons from this battle spread quickly. Officers and commanders studied how he used terrain to his advantage, how he positioned his tank, and how he timed each attack with precision. They realized that success in battle was not just about firepower or numbers, but also about leadership, planning, and understanding human nature. The commander had demonstrated that even a relatively inexperienced crew could achieve extraordinary results when led by someone who knew how to think several steps ahead and inspire confidence in others. His approach challenged conventional thinking, showing that skill, courage, and clever tactics could outweigh experience and technology. His crew often said that the key to their success was the trust they had in their commander. They had learned to watch him carefully, to anticipate his instructions, and to rely on his judgment even in moments when fear would have frozen an ordinary soldier. That trust created a bond that was essential in battle. Every soldier who served under him knew that hesitation could be deadly, and every act of courage reinforced the belief that they could survive if they followed his example. The psychological strength of his leadership was just as important as his tactical skill. Soldiers learn from example, and he had become the example of calm, precise, and confident command under pressure. Even the enemy couldn't ignore his presence. German crews who survived the battle spoke of him in whispered tones, realizing that they had faced someone extraordinary. They had underestimated him at first, assuming that their numbers and tanks would be enough. But each destroyed vehicle and each clever maneuver had forced them to rethink their assumptions. They had faced skilled commanders before, but none with the combination of calm, intelligence, and courage that he displayed. By the end of the battle, fear had replaced confidence, and hesitation had replaced decisiveness. The enemy had learned a harsh lesson. One determined and skilled commander could change the course of a battle. The impact of this battle went beyond the immediate battlefield. Other Allied units began to take note of the tactics he used. They saw that terrain could be used not just for defense, but to create opportunities for attack. They observed how timing and observation could maximize the effectiveness of every shot and movement. They recognized the importance of leadership that could inspire confidence and control fear. His methods became a model for others, showing that innovation, courage, and preparation could achieve what many thought impossible. Soldiers and officers would later apply his techniques in other battles, improving their chances of success and survival. The commander's rise to fame was also a story of human resilience. Before 1942, he had never commanded a tank in battle, nor had he trained extensively with armored units. Yet, through study, observation, and determination, he mastered armored warfare. He learned from manuals, practiced tirelessly, and applied his knowledge creatively in combat. His journey from an inexperienced officer to the top Western Allied tank ace was not just about natural skill. It was about dedication, learning, and the ability to adapt under pressure. It showed that even in war, growth and improvement are possible when someone is willing to learn and act decisively. For his men, the lessons went beyond tactics. They saw how leadership could transform a group of individuals into a coordinated, confident, and effective team. They learned that fear could be controlled, that hesitation could be replaced by decisive action, and that courage could be inspired by example. They experienced firsthand how one person's calm and precise decision-making could change the outcome of a battle. These lessons stayed with them long after the smoke cleared, shaping their approach to future battles and their understanding of what it meant to be a soldier under an extraordinary leader. The story also revealed the importance of adaptability. The commander had not relied on brute force alone. He understood the capabilities and limitations of a Sherman tank and used it creatively against superior German armor. He anticipated enemy movements, exploited terrain, and made decisions that maximized his advantage. This ability to adapt to the battlefield, to think beyond conventional tactics, and to find opportunities in seemingly impossible situations was what set him apart. It was a reminder that success in war often depends as much on intelligence, flexibility, and observation as it does on weapons and numbers. The battlefield itself bore the marks of his genius. Burned-out tanks, scattered debris, and the chaos left behind told a story of skill and precision. Yet behind the destruction was also a story of courage, leadership, and human resilience. His men had survived because they were inspired. The enemy had faltered because they were intimidated, and the outcome of the battle had been shaped not by luck, but by preparation, timing, and daring. The commander had turned a moment of extreme danger into a lasting lesson in leadership and strategy, demonstrating that one skilled individual could influence the course of events on a grand scale. The legacy of the commander extended far beyond this single engagement. He became an example for others, a figure whose actions proved that skill, courage, and leadership could overcome fear and adversity. Soldiers who followed in his footsteps studied his methods, learning from both his successes and his decision-making process. They learned how to control fear, how to inspire confidence, and how to think strategically in moments of extreme pressure. His legacy was not just in the destruction of enemy tanks, but in the transformation of those around him and the lessons that would endure long after the battle had ended. Even decades later, historians and military experts look back at his actions with admiration. They analyze the way he combined tactical skill with psychological insight, how he turned terrain into an advantage, and how he inspired confidence in his men while creating fear in his enemy. His story became a case study in leadership under pressure, a model for armored warfare, and an example of what could be achieved through preparation, courage, and clever thinking. His achievements were remarkable, but what made them truly legendary was the way he accomplished them, with calm, intelligence, and unwavering focus under fire. The human side of the story is equally important. The commander was not just a strategist or a skilled tank operator. He was a leader who understood the fears and motivations of the men around him. He knew that courage could be inspired, that confidence could be taught, and that fear could be managed. By staying calm, observant, and decisive, he gave his men the tools they needed to succeed. They trusted him completely, and that trust turned them into a highly effective unit capable of extraordinary achievements. It is this combination of human insight and tactical skill that made him a true legend of the battlefield. In the end, the story of the commander and the destruction of 18 German tanks is more than just a tale of war. It is a story about courage, leadership, preparation, and human resilience. It is about how one person, through skill, intelligence, and determination, can inspire others, overcome fear, and achieve what many would consider impossible. It is about the lasting impact of leadership under pressure, the importance of preparation and adaptability, and the extraordinary results that can come from combining tactical skill with the ability to inspire those around you. His achievements in Normandy were remarkable, but the lessons they teach are timeless. They show that even in the most dangerous and uncertain situations, skill, courage, and leadership can change the outcome, inspire others, and leave a legacy that will be remembered long after the battle is over. If you're enjoying my content, show some appreciation by hitting the like button and giving me a follow. Your support really motivates me to keep creating.